Today I want to talk about electrical system and what can happen if they're not properly maintained. What you'll see here is you'll see contactor, also you'll see isolating switches, and also you'll see an air handling unit, fans, motors, etc. But if you look into this footage, you'll observe that there's a little spark on the contactor where the wire is connected. That's a weak point, and there you'll have a voltage drop to the motor, and the motor will start suffering. So because one phase is unbalanced, now the motor starts suffering, it starts overheat, but also the overload will pick up this problem and will allow the motor to run until the peak will be reached where the overload will interrupt the circuit. So just to make it a little bit clearer, when you will fit a motor into a system, the motor have a batch, and on that batch you will see motors running amps. So when you will set up the overload must match the motor's amps consumption. Now the threshold has been breached and overload interrupted the circuit. This is to protect the motor. So now you have to do an investigation before resetting the overload. The motor overload protection tripped and cut the power supply, but the alarm light for the ventilation system didn't turn on. You'll see here, it didn't turn on. But when you want to press the start, then the alarm will turn on, telling you that's an alarm. This is not really the way I would do it. I would like that alarm to be constantly on because the customer need to see it, so he call us to sort out the problem. You notice that alarm lights only illuminate when the momentary push button is pressed and the circuit is closed. So seeing this picture, the light is off if that start switch button is not pushed. I modified the alarm circuit with customer permission, and I changed the monitoring approach. As a result, the alarm light now stays on while the overall protection is activated. Just have a look and try to understand. I changed the wire configuration, and now the light alarm got its own supply, and that will make the customer to see it faster. See, now I'm pressing the start switch, and regardless of the start switch status, the alarm stays on while this overload is activated. Because you notice that the contactor cannot be activated by the pressing start momentary push button due to the overload protection. However, the alarm light continue to stay on. In this footage we will see I included both circuits, so you can see both in the same time. The top image shows you the modified circuit for the alarm where the light is constantly on, and the bottom one shows you that the light comes on only when you press the start switch button. That's not really good. Now let's talk about people habits. People like to reset the overload without investigating the motor. Sometimes they like it, the motor might run a couple of days because there could be different type of faults, electrical faults, mechanical faults, bearing, etc. And they just constantly reset the overload until the motor will be completely damaged, or the wire will be burned, or anything. So that's not very recommended. Like you'll see now in this footage, you'll have an activated overload, you have an alarm, someone come to your premises, you will press the overload, ignoring the fact that the motor has some issues. Then in a couple of minutes the overload will trip again, and you will stop the motor, whatever it is, fan, pump, or anything. People are hoping that the miracles will happen, and then they will reset that again. And the more you reset it, the time in between the overload tripping time will be shorter and shorter, because the damage will become more and more, how can I say, the motor will be damaged more and more. And you're supposed to investigate. So resetting the overload without inspecting the circuit or motor is not a suitable procedure. In other words, if you have an electrical circuit that is overloaded or a motor that is not working correctly, simply resetting it without figuring out the root cause of the problem is not a good idea. It is important to investigate the issue before you reset that one. Also, setting the overload, it is very important thing electricians must do, because if you will not set the overload correctly, you can burn the motor. So you have to pay attention to this. So just look at this, what can happen if you not set an overload correctly. The motor will run, one cable might burn, the other two will increase the amps. The overload will try to heat up, but it is set up too high, and finally the circuit breaker will trip, but your motor will be damaged. So if you use an overload protection, it is essential to set the overload correctly. The people which eliminate the overloads, that makes the electrical circuit and the motor to rely on a circuit breaker, but when the circuit breaker trips, that will be too late because your motor will be already burned. The circuit breaker is not designed to protect the motor, but it is designed to protect the supply circuit that supplies power to the motor. Also, you have to understand how the control works. You see, this is a contactor failure, and obviously it will affect the power circuit, but there's nothing wrong with the motor or the power circuit. In this case, it's just the contactor. I saw an electrician which changed the motor for this one. That's quite crazy. Guys, thank you very much. You can watch this video a couple of times if you are understanding. So just remember, the motors must be correctly protected, or what can I say, instead to pay money for a contactor or an overload, you have to replace a motor which will cost £1,000. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, bye.